welcome to the latest episode of Talking COP, the new podcast from the University of Salford's sustainability, climate and environment experts. I'm Victoria Coleman and I'll be your host for today. Joining me, we have Professor of Urban Sustainability and Director of the Environmental Research and Innovation Centre at Salford, Mike Hardman. Welcome, Mike.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So we've just got a few questions for you today, and the first one is, how can cities adapt to future challenges around climate change, e.g. like smart cities and UGI?
That's a really big question. There's so much that cities should be doing and are doing around this as well. I could probably spend a few hours talking about this alone. I think, first of all, strong policy. We need to make sure there's that strong oversight that feeds down to some of these creative concepts becoming a reality on the ground. We need to make sure that all sectors are involved, so it isn't just the public sector pushing this forward, but the private sector, and obviously us as universities are heavily involved in that as well. What I'm particularly passionate about are cities pushing boundaries. So you mentioned urban green infrastructure, for example, not just looking at mundane or everyday spaces, but thinking outside the box to maybe what you might deem more radical solutions in our cities. Let's be honest, cities, urban land is at a premium, so we need to start thinking in different ways of how to incorporate these solutions that can help us to adapt or mitigate against climate change, cool down our cities, enable people to have better access to nature within our urban environments as well. I think Manchester is a great example of this, where I've seen almost a doubling of the spatial area of these kind of radical solutions, the living walls, the urban parks, the very first in over 100 years, right in the heart of our city, all the way through to the green roofs and even this idea of producing food in our cities. And I think on that smart agenda you mentioned, the smart cities, that also is so important. But technology isn't the only solution. It's part of that wider jigsaw puzzle, if that makes sense. So it's all of these parts coming together and that strong oversight, all these different actors working together to make sure that our cities are more sustainable and are adapting to these challenges around climate change moving forwards.
Wow, okay, thank you so much. That's so interesting. So our second question for you is, the university's GreenME project is currently exploring innovation around urban greening in Europe and North America. What are the impacts and link to climate change?
Yes, a really good question as well. And the GreenME project, I can't remember the acronym off the top of my head. It's a very long acronym, but it's about a €6 million Horizon Europe project led by colleagues in Barcelona. The University of Salford is one of many partners involved in this over the 4 years. It's a very ambitious project. So at the heart of that project is all about scaling up these nature-based interventions in our cities with a particular focus around health and well-being. Obviously, there's links to climate change here as well because of the trade-offs if we're scaling up green solutions in our cities. As I mentioned before, this idea of potentially cooling our cities, maybe preventing flooding in future as well as allowing people to have better access to green space in the heart of our urban environments. I'm particularly passionate about this project because it brings together public health, it brings together ourselves as geographers, planners, epidemiologists. There's nurses involved in this as well. So it's about bringing together people to make sure that we're making our cities and broader areas more resilient moving forwards. And this collaboration is key. Without this collaboration, we can never achieve these ambitious goals, whether it's in the GreenME project or further afield as well. But GreenME, again, really exciting. It's looking at Europe and the USA in particular. We've got trials going on. We're looking at what works. And the idea is we can look at the evidence and then put that into practice and make our cities or our areas adapt, scale up some solutions that can help to tackle health and wellbeing issues in these communities. At the heart of GreenME is this idea of we're looking at passive engagement with nature, ad hoc engagement with nature, and therapies through nature as well. So there's a real spectrum of spaces that are being explored. And I think one of the big take-home bits from this project is that 50% of our partners on the project are non-academics. So they're effectively impact partners. It's local authorities, it's regional governments. We've got a lot of national stakeholders involved as well. And that means the research directly links to change. So going fully back to what you were asking about, the link to climate change, you can see how the findings of this project will hopefully lead to more investment in certain types of green infrastructure in our cities, particularly around health and well-being. But the trade-offs of that, the wider benefits of that, will hopefully be realised. And the idea is that we can have that huge impact in our cities around the climate change agenda as well.
Okay, and our next question for you, Mike, is what are the benefits or challenges of infra-green infrastructure?
Loads of challenges, so many challenges around this, so many barriers. And again, I could spend a while talking about them. I think the biggest one is finance. A lot of the finance is short term, ad hoc, and unfortunately, it encourages a lot of competition between groups. There's only so much money out there. So, in terms of collaboration, that really does stifle a lot of the collaboration that's happening because people are having to compete for the same pots of funding to enable a community garden or new pocket park to be realised. So that's a huge issue. And long-term funding as well. A lot of these projects are funded for maybe a year or 2 years and suddenly are cut. I think that also comes from the public purse as well. When we look at where there's trimming of budgets at a wider scale, a lot of the first things to be cut are parks, budgets, green space budgets. It's often what happens, and we can see that in local authorities across the country now that are in, are in a tricky situation with their budgets. And the first thing to go are the parks and green spaces budgets. I think there are also challenges around maintenance. So if we think of the living walls that we're starting to see a lot more of in our cities, it's really difficult to maintain those systems. There are specialist companies that exist to maintain them, but it requires a lot of specialist equipment and knowledge and can be quite costly over the years to do that. And I think that puts a lot of organisations off enabling some of these in our cities because of the sheer cost. I think the other thing is around communities. Again, involving communities is a huge challenge. And where you don't involve communities, the lessons learned show us that a lot of the projects will fail. So if you're not involving or speaking, proactively engaging with communities, then projects are going to face a lot of challenges moving forwards. So there's a lot of challenges there, but my big take home one is funding. We need more creative, longer term funding that fosters collaboration as opposed to causing challenges and fragmentation amongst a lot of these groups.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And our last question for you today is cities are getting bigger and more complex. Are there any good practice examples of enabling resilience in these areas?
There's so many. I mentioned Greater Manchester. We can start there. Greater Manchester, I think, is a great example of this joined up thinking on a city region level, where you've got obviously a strong regional, devolved kind of government, if you will, doing a lot of innovative stuff. So if we look at the green agenda, for example, there's the Greater Manchester Environment Fund that's been around for many years now. And I love that fund because it's all about looking at these radical ideas and scaling up these creative solutions, not just in Manchester, but also the Stockports, the Salfords, the Boltons as well. So that spatial approach, that focus at the regional level is a great example of where building that resilience isn't just focused on the main urban area, if you will, but it's distributed across the region. There are so many other kind of micro and macro good practice examples around the world. Detroit comes to mind actually as this post-industrial city where there's been a huge investment in things like urban food growing over the years as a way of skilling up people, creating a whole new economy really there, as well as linking to the climate change agenda through the creation of short food supply chains. If we think of in South America on a more global level, again, Curitiba often cited and still used, I think, in high schools is the key case study of a sustainable city where investment in renewables, again, investment in green infrastructure, and a more inclusive, co-produced approach to designing that city has really put it at the forefront of many textbooks and exemplar practice around the world. A bit closer to home, one just smaller tangible example, if I may, that we've been working on at the university for a while is in Oldham. Oldham, often seen as quite detached and perhaps not as connected to other parts of Manchester. But there's been a real focus over the years to look at scaling up public transport, connectivity, green solutions, renewable energy, and so on. And we've been working on Northern Roots, which is a large scale urban farm and eco park project right in the heart of Salford that is employing people and is effectively this radical example of how we can adapt to climate change right in the heart of a city. That's been a catalyst for the wider regeneration of Oldham as well. So now you've seen investment in the town centre of Oldham and a really, really forward thinking development plan for that urban area moving forwards. If I may just add some caveats to this all sounds fantastic, but there are lots and lots of challenges around funding, around making sure that all of this is inclusive. I mentioned right at the beginning this idea of green roofs and living walls, which get everyone's attention. They're fantastic. But we need to be aware of the social value of these assets. So one of my biggest moans around green roofs in Manchester is none of them are accessible to the public. And that's something we need to be aware of, is making sure that if we're investing in these kind of solutions, if you will, to climate change or adapting our cities, we need to be aware of making sure that they're embedded within our communities. Northern Roots and Oldham have done that from the beginning. And that's what really helps that project to stand out. It is genuinely co-created with the community. It's embedded in the community. It's not parachuted in there. And I think that's a really good example of how we need to reflect on these solutions, how they link with the populations that they're meant to serve, and how it can be done in this really inclusive way moving forwards. Again, I could speak for hours about this. There's so many good examples out there. I'd definitely have a look at the GreenME project, have a look at some of our other projects that we're working on as well to see good practice, and look at this idea of where it could be replicated in other urban contexts as well.
Mike, thank you so much for all that useful information and for being here and chatting with us today.
Oh, thanks very much for having me.